So how about a couple of comments and questions, and then we'll have a hip hop party. Yes, ma'am. There could be consequences. For example, if yes, so the question is, are there consequences when someone makes up a story that implicates another person in a crime? And the answer is technically, legally, yes. So it's a crime to falsely report that someone else committed a crime. It's also, as we all know, a crime to lie in court, to commit perjury, which is what Detroit did. Those cases are rarely prosecuted. They're hard to prove. Again, just because a jury finds someone innocent doesn't mean that either technically that person really didn't do it. So there's still some hardcore types in the U.S. Attorney's Office, for example, who don't speak to me because they think that I committed a crime. So the answer is those cases are rarely prosecuted. In the book, one of the things I talk about that's relevant to residents of Atlanta is where that happens in cases that are a lot more troubling than my own case, and that's with snitches. So snitches are police informants who get some kind of benefit for testifying, and usually the benefit is cash money, or it's a break in their own criminal prosecution. And many of you are familiar with a horrible case in Atlanta a couple years ago where a 90-year-old woman was murdered by these three men who were breaking down the door to her house. She shot. She was scared to death to leave the house. She shot once through the door. They then tore down the door and shot her 38 times. And after they shot her, they put her body in handcuffs. And these three men were officers of the Atlanta Police Department. And they'd been told, lied to by a snitch, that drugs were being dealt from that house. So again, that's the case where people lie to make cases against other people. That's a lot more common, I think, than what happened to me, and a lot more troubling. Any other comments? Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, in one of the ads for your book, I think you would make a comment towards when you say in your book that drug addicts should not be prosecuted, it should be released, and then what? What would you just release?
Well, even just release would be. I'm sorry. So. I don't think people should go to prison for using drugs or for selling drugs to other consenting adults. So the question is, well, what would happen? Or what would our world look like? I started out by making this argument about the African American community, that African American drug users and dealers shouldn't be prosecuted. And I've now expanded that to no one should be prosecuted for drug crimes. But people used to ask, well, what would the black community look like if we didn't lock up its drug users and drug sellers? And my answer was always, it would look like the white community. Most people who use drugs, actually, African American or white, don't go to prison. We all know that. Most of the people in this room, statistically, have used drugs. And I don't know if anyone other than me has actually been to prison. And even I didn't go to prison for drug use, although I've used drugs plenty of times. I've never actually been stopped by the police for anything that I've done, any crime that I've actually committed. Been stopped by the police a lot, but again, never for a crime that I've committed. So I have a chapter about drugs and the law in the book, where the first thing I do is come out about some of my recreational use of drugs, including that when I started prosecuting, I made myself swear that I wasn't going to smoke pot anymore. It wasn't such a hard promise to keep because it's never been a big thing, but in all of the circles I traveled, especially at Yale and Harvard, and then at the law firm, a lot of people smoked weed. And it's recreational, it was fun. And so it was weird to kind of put myself in this mode where I'd be working up these frothy closing statements trying to put this particular drug dealer in prison. And I didn't really believe it. And as an academic, now I'm free to say why. So public health, to the extent that people using drugs and selling drugs is a problem, the public health system is the best way to deal with that problem. And again, maybe if locking up drug users and sellers worked, if it helped make communities safer, I would reluctantly endorse it. But it doesn't do that. So economists talk about this thing called the replacement effect, which means that the police lock up, Julio and T-Bone, they're selling drugs on the corner now. The police lock them up. Next day, DeAndre, Lucretia are there to take their place. That's going to keep happening until you lock up. Well, now in the African American community, we have 1 in 3 of our young black men locked up. In D.C., it's actually half. Half of the black men in their 20s have a criminal case. So there's got to be a better solution. Yes, sir.
Going through your head that day when you went out and saw that, what could you have done differently when you woke up and you looked out of that window and saw that sawmill?
I would have stayed my ass in the house.
And secondly, how this type of change comes from our legislature, the force they respond to the community, and it's not necessarily the minority community that they listen to. How would this change the institution of our system? We do have some judges like Judge Arrington try to do the right thing and still they get criticized when they try to do something that's kind of positive. What do you think of the
I was being flipped with my response that in order to, the question was, what would I have done differently on the day that I was arrested? But in the chapter, I go more into my mindset, which is that I'm a prosecutor. I love to point my finger at the bad guy. I love to avenge wrong. And one of the things I think a lot about in the book is this mindset that prosecutors have. And it's an interesting psychology. I wonder out loud in the book if it's related to my feelings about some of the boys who I went to school with when I was growing up on the south side of Chicago. And some of those boys didn't treat a guy who got good test scores and taught kind of like a white boy, didn't treat him so good. And so 15 years later, I'm seeing guys like that at the defense table. And again, I'm pointing my finger at them. I'm calling them names. I'm getting in his face. That's part of my job. So it's this psychology that I have that I actually transferred to this case that I was building against Detroit. So what I would do every day, I talk about in the book, is I wanted to catch her leaving one of these notes on the car. So I actually put this camera next to my window, and I would watch every night, waiting to take a picture. And I actually didn't see her doing that, but that morning when I woke up and looked out the window, that was the first thing I did every morning during that period. I saw it. So, what I would have done differently is chilled out. Chilled out a little bit. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it's what prosecutors are like. And so part of what the book is about is how those feelings get out of control. Because prosecutors run shit now. And by run shit, I mean they run our criminal justice system. They get whatever they want. And a lot of them think just like I did.